Hey guys, tonight we're sinking our teeth, well, maybe not too deep, into a time when food was, let's say, more survival-based than flavor-forward. Imagine stepping into a smoky, one-room cottage on a gray medieval morning. Outside, mist clings to the fields. Inside, a pot bubbles over an open fire, but don't get too excited. It's just barley gruel again. That's right. Tonight's story is about the daily grain grind of medieval life. And if you're the kind of person who panics when your fridge has nothing but a limp carrot and expired yogurt, well, you might not have made it in the 1300s. Just saying. As you prepare to rest, let the worries of the day settle down. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some gentle background sound, and let your mind drift along with the soft glow of tonight's story. If you enjoy these historical journeys, please hit like and subscribe to support us. It may seem small, but it truly helps me keep telling stories every night. And if you have any suggestions or wishes, don't hesitate to share them in the comments. You're walking slowly through a medieval village, your feet squelching in yesterday's rain. There's a smell in the air, part wood smoke, part, did someone forget to clean the animal pen? But you get used to it. Your stomach growls. Breakfast? If you're lucky, someone left a lump of yesterday's oatmeal by the hearth. In fact, you'd better get used to porridge, mush, and something called pottage, which sounds fancier than it is. Picture a thick grayish slop made from lentils, barley, and maybe, on a festive day, a bit of onion. Basically, if your idea of breakfast involves avocado toast and oat milk lattes, medieval life might hit you like a sack of raw turnips. People in this time lived mostly off grains. Wheat if you were rich, rye or oats if you were not. Bread was life, dense, dark, and about as soft as a coaster. It wasn't just food. It was the plate. Really. Trencher bread was your dish and your dinner. At the end of the meal, you either ate it or gave it to a beggar or a dog. In that order. Hopefully. And speaking of bread, did you know that some millers were actually legally obligated to have their grinding stones inspected? Not because of quality control, but because they were notorious for cheating customers by adding things like chalk or ground-up beans to bulk out the flour. The FDA wasn't around yet, so basically, surprise minerals were just part of the experience. Now don't imagine people scarfing down fluffy baguettes or buttery rolls. No, think hockey puck. Think edible brick. Bread back then could break a tooth or start a bar fight depending on how stale it was. Yet it was essential. If you didn't have grain, you didn't have much of anything. Even the nobles, with their feasts and goblets and roast peacocks, relied on grains. Sure, they got the fancy white wheat flour, while peasants gnawed on rye as dark as a tax collector's soul. But at the end of the day, everyone was a grain junkie. Here's a little-known truth. During bad harvest years, people would mix bark or acorns into their bread. Imagine biting into your sandwich and thinking, huh, that crunch was oak? Some folks even used dried peas, beans, or old wine mash. It was like the medieval version of Chopped, but without the judges or the prize money, just survival. And yes, there were grain-based beverages too. Ale was basically liquid bread. It wasn't just for fun, it was for hydration. Water wasn't always safe to drink, so even kids got a pint or two of small beer, which sounds adorable until you remember they drank it instead of juice boxes. As you stroll past a thatched cottage, you catch a whiff of something cooking. A scent not exactly mouth-watering but definitely edible. Someone's reheating yesterday's barley mush, maybe adding a wild leek or two. That's dinner and probably tomorrow's breakfast too. You wonder if they dream about spices. Spoiler, they do. Grain taxes were a thing too. Lords and kings taxed bread production and flour mills. Bakers were sometimes flogged for shortchanging customers or baking underweight loaves. There's even a famous medieval law called the Assize of Bread, to standardize prices and quality. But enforcement? Well, let's just say it was more suggestion than law. And here's something scholars still squabble about. Just how nutritious was the average medieval peasant diet? On one hand, grains are filling and provided crucial calories. On the other hand, without enough fats, proteins, or vitamins, it led to stunted growth, tooth decay, and that generally tired medieval peasant look that never quite caught on in fashion circles. So you've got people living on barley, oats, rye, maybe an apple if they're lucky, or a dried fish if they live near the coast. It's not a gourmet lifestyle, but it kept folks alive. Barely. Pun absolutely intended. You shuffle toward the village square. Past a baker who's pounding dough with the strength of a man who knows no electric mixers. His oven glows faintly red. You peek inside. Rows of round, squat loaves, scorched at the edges. Not a sprinkle of sea salt or rosemary in sight. Rustic, yes. Delicious? Well, let's call it hearty. In the richer houses you might see white bread. The kind made with sifted flour, soft and tender. They called it manchet. It was what nobles ate with stewed pheasant and almond milk. Meanwhile, back at the peasant hut, someone scraping porridge crust off the pot and calling it dessert. And that's the kicker, grain wasn't just food. It was politics, economics, and survival wrapped into one heavy, sometimes moldy package. Wars were fought over it. Taxes were built around it. Famine followed when harvests failed. Grain ruled the medieval stomach like a stern, flaky queen. So next time your sourdough starter doesn't rise, take comfort. You're living in a time where bread is a choice, not a question of life and death. And no one's slipping sawdust into your flour. Probably. But for now, in this sleepy village, all you have is what's in that pot. Another scoop of warm, gloppy barley. You sip it slowly, feeling its weight settle in your belly. It's not delicious, but it's enough. Just enough. And with that, you lean back against the wood beam of a hut, watching the smoke drift upward. Someone hums a tune nearby, simple and soft. You feel full not just with food but with the strange comfort of routine. Of survival. Of another day marked by one more bowl of grain. You exhale. The night deepens. And our journey continues. When you're ready, your eyes blink slowly open to a hazy dawn. The air feels thicker today, damp with the promise of rain. And somewhere in the distance, a rooster performs its one job with irritating commitment. You stretch your limbs beneath a rough wool blanket and feel the ache of a wooden bed stuffed with straw that pokes like the world's least helpful acupuncture session. Welcome back to the Middle Ages. As you rise, you realize something smells different. Not necessarily better, just different. A sour, fermenty scent drifts from the kitchen corner. Ah yes, it's time to explore the second truth of medieval eating. Fermentation was everything. See, in a world without refrigerators, people had to get creative with their leftovers. You couldn't just toss your soup in a Tupperware and pray it didn't smell weird tomorrow. No, you had to pickle, salt, smoke, or let time do its funky magic. Basically, if a medieval person ate it, chances are it was bubbling in a barrel at some point. Take sauerkraut, for example. Not just a German stereotype, it was a genuine survival tactic. Cabbage was chopped and layered with salt, pressed down under a heavy stone, and left to stew in its own juices. The result? Tangy, weirdly fizzy, and surprisingly rich in vitamin C. The real miracle here isn't that it tasted decent, but that it helped stave off scurvy before people even knew what scurvy was. And fermentation didn't stop at vegetables. Nearly every household had a bubbling crock of something, maybe ale, maybe vinegar, maybe whatever the family hoped would turn into cheese and not death. Speaking of cheese, don't imagine neat little waxed wedges from the supermarket. Think soft, lumpy rounds wrapped in cloth and hung from ceiling beams, slowly evolving from edible to sharp enough to fight with. Some cheeses were so pungent they needed their own room. Others were used as currency. Yes, cheese was once literally money. How much for that sheep? 3 wheels of goat's cheese and a fermented herring. Fair trade. But perhaps the most famous fermented fare was ale. You already met small beer in section 1. Yes, that weak, kid-friendly beer brewed because the water might give you parasites. But for adults, stronger ale was the fuel of the workforce. It was bread in a mug. It was joy and hydration and a mild buzz to make plowing the fields slightly less soul-crushing. Now, if you're picturing golden pints with foamy heads and hops swirling like magic, slow down. Medieval ale was cloudy, sour, and warm. Hops weren't even a regular ingredient until centuries later. Most brews used a mix of herbs called grut, which sounds like a sneeze and tasted only marginally better. Still, it did the trick. Here's the part scholars still raise eyebrows over. The role of the alewife. That's right. Brewing beer was women's work. In fact, most village ale was brewed by housewives, grandmas, and spinsters with a good nose for fermentation. They brewed in small batches, sold the extra, and sometimes even wore tall pointed hats so people could spot them in the market. Yes, that hat. More on that in a witch-themed episode someday. You pass a neighbor's home where a crooked wooden sign swings in the breeze. It's marked with a symbol, maybe a broom or sheaf of wheat. That's how folks knew ale was ready. Imagine walking past a Starbucks and sniffing the air for fermentation levels instead of caramel drizzle. Meat? Well, unless you were nobility or happened to catch something unlucky in a trap. You didn't eat it often. So fermentation wasn't just for fun. It was the only way to stretch out the rare treasures you did have. Fish was salted until it crunched. Meat was smoked until it resembled jerky's evil twin. In winter, these savory fossils were pulled from the rafters and soaked for days to make them less leathery. And let's not forget the fishy loophole of medieval religious rules. People weren't allowed to eat meat on certain days, sometimes over 150 days a year, so fish became essential. But the line between fish and not fish? Blurry. Real blurry. There's an old tale of medieval monks arguing whether beaver tails counted as fish. Spoiler, the church said yes. Apparently, if it swims, it qualifies. Other animals thrown under this ecclesiastical loophole thus included puffins and barnacle geese. That last one? Scholars still chuckle over it. Barnacle geese migrate and were rarely seen nesting, so people assumed they grew on trees near the sea, like some kind of poultry fruit hybrid. Thus, a bird became a seafood option. No notes. The reliance on fermented food also created odd superstitions. Some believed that sour bread came from a bad spirit, or a vengeful baker's ghost. Others thought you could tell someone's mood by the smell of their cheese, which honestly still kind of holds up. And yes, sometimes fermentation went terribly wrong. Ergot, a fungus that grew on rye, caused hallucinations, convulsions, and in extreme cases, death. Whole villages would suffer outbreaks, thinking they'd been cursed or bewitched. One time in 1518, a dancing plague hit Strasbourg. People literally couldn't stop dancing for days, possibly due to contaminated grain. Or maybe it was just really, really bad ale. Modern historians still argue over the specifics. Was it mass hysteria? Poisoning? Some funky intersection of both? The debates continue, but one thing's clear. When food storage depends on luck and weather, dinner can quickly turn into an adventure. You step into a dark kitchen where a woman is stirring a large ceramic crock. She lifts the lid and winces. Yep, this batch of pickled turnips didn't quite turn out. She mutters something about the wrong moon phase, wipes her hands, and turns to sliced dried apples for the winter. And here's the beautiful thing. In this world of bubbling jars and sour loaves, people still found comfort in the familiar flavors. A slice of rye with a smear of soft cheese. A swig of warm ale after a hard day's work. Even a questionable pickle could bring a bit of brightness to the gray. You lean against the door frame, inhaling the earthy, tangy scent of survival. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. And somewhere outside, a raven caws because apparently not even birds like the smell of fermented eel stew. The smell of damp straw and yesterday's fire still lingers on your cloak as you step outside. It's just after sunrise, and the village is already bustling in that sleepy, grumbly way only medieval people can manage without caffeine. A donkey brays. A child is chasing a chicken that absolutely does not want to be chased. And you? You're about to learn that spices in medieval food were a confusing mix of opulence, superstition, and fraud. Here's the scene. You make your way past a thatched stall where a wiry merchant with a suspiciously toothless grin is selling little cloth packets of, well, something. He swears it's fine cinnamon from the east. He also swears on his mother's grave that it keeps away demons and helps with flatulence. In that order. Welcome to the spice trade. In theory, spice was everywhere in the medieval kitchen. In practice, it was either A, fake, B, hoarded by the rich, or C, used so strangely that modern chefs would lose their minds. Let's start with the obvious. Why the obsession with spices in the first place? For medieval nobles, spices were status symbols. They were the Teslas and Instagram blue ticks of the 14th century. You weren't just seasoning your stew. You were flexing your wealth. Black pepper? Imported from India. Cloves and nutmeg? All the way from the Spice Islands by ship, camel, and pure chaos. It's hard to overstate how luxurious these items were. A handful of saffron threads could be worth more than a month's rent on a peasant hovel. People literally wrote wills leaving their cinnamon stockpile to heirs. Of course, that meant fraud was rampant. Ground-up tree bark passed for cinnamon. Burnt almonds were sold as pepper. Spice inspectors actually became a job title in some cities. Imagine being the guy whose entire career involved sniffing suspicious powders and trying not to die. And then there were the weird superstitions. See, spices weren't just food. They were medicine, perfume, and magical force fields against evil. Nutmeg was believed to protect against the plague. Cloves were worn in lockets to ward off illness. Some folks even tucked sprigs of rosemary in their underpants because, well, who knows? Scholars still debate whether medieval people actually believed spices could cure diseases, or if it was just a handy excuse to smell better during a pandemic. Either way, spices were taken very seriously. There are records of cooks being punished for disrespecting pepper. Yes, culinary court cases existed. They were probably very spicy. So what kind of dishes were these spices used in? Well, that's where things get strange. Imagine a beef stew sweetened with raisins, cloves, cinnamon, and ginger. Or a fish pie spiced like a holiday cookie. Medieval cuisine had a serious sweet tooth, even for savory food. Sugar, when they had it, was lumped into everything from chicken to eel. If it sounds like dinner and dessert collided in a Renaissance food fight, congratulations, you've understood medieval cooking. This wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. The idea was to balance the four humors of the body: hot, cold, wet, and dry. Every ingredient was believed to affect your mood and health. So if you were feeling melancholic, you might get a dish with warming spices to perk you up. Garlic for phlegm, cinnamon for sluggishness. Basically, it was the original, very poorly tested version of mood-based meal planning. And it didn't stop at flavor. Spices were also used to cover up bad meat, a fact often repeated but not entirely accurate. Historians are still arguing about this one. Yet, sometimes food was less than fresh. But was that why they used spices? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe it was just because the rich could. Still, imagine biting into a leg of lamb that's vaguely gray, laced with 5 kinds of powder you don't recognize, and then drenched in honey. Sounds like something a toddler would make in a kitchen simulator game. But in the grand halls of medieval lords, that was gourmet. Meanwhile, the poor? They had salt. And not much else. You pass by a communal table where a group of laborers is sharing a bowl of barley porridge, lightly seasoned with onion. That's it. Onion. Maybe a turnip, if someone got lucky or stole from the monastery garden. Spices were for feasts. For holidays. For the rare days when you might be invited to witness someone get knighted, married, or beheaded. And even then, your taste of spice would likely be in the form of a shared tart, sweetened with dried fruit, dusted with something vaguely nutty, and gone in 3 bites. Interestingly, some spices were used less for taste and more for the show. At banquets, cooks might prepare an entire roast swan, and then reassemble its feathers over the cooked bird to make it look whole again. Then sprinkle it with edible gold, flavored with cinnamon and rosewater, and serve it to an audience who would probably rather just have another mug of ale. There's also the curious case of verjuice, a sour liquid made from unripe grapes. Used like vinegar, it added a tartness to everything from sauces to stews. It's not quite a spice, but it does prove one thing: medieval cooks loved drama. And no one knew that better than the royal courts. Feast menus from 14th century England listed dozens of dishes in one sitting. Spiced quail, honey roasted rabbit, peacock glazed in saffron and served with gilded feathers. Half the guests probably didn't even taste half the food. It was about being seen eating it. So as you walk back home, nose filled with the faint scent of cloves from the merchant's pouch you bought, probably sawdust, you can't help but smile. It's all ridiculous. It's all wonderful. It's all deeply human. And who knows, maybe the rosemary in your underpants really is keeping you healthy. Stranger things have happened. As the bells ring for midday prayer and a cat darts across your path with a stolen chicken foot, you slip through the alley and into the quiet of your own little hut. The fire crackles low. A pot simmers gently, filled with beans, water, and a single dried apple for sweetness. No spices. No saffron. But it's warm, and it's yours. You stir it slowly, inhaling the honest steam, and let the moment settle deep into your bones. A breeze rustles through the shutters as you sit with your humble stew. Somewhere in the distance a dog barks, more annoyed than aggressive. You set your bowl aside, belly full enough, and begin your walk toward the village square. Today is market day, and that means something peculiar. You're about to witness how bread could get you sued, fined, or even publicly shamed in medieval times. At first glance it's just bread. Loaves stacked on wooden carts, round and slightly burnt at the edges. Nothing suspicious here. But look closer, and you'll see a tiny official stamp burned into the crust. Yes, like a medieval QR code. That stamp means this bread was inspected, measured, and approved. If not, let's just say you do not want to mess with the bread police. Enter the assize of bread, one of the oldest food regulations in English history. Passed in the 13th century. It dictated exactly how much a loaf should weigh and what it should cost, depending on the price of grain. Too light? You're fined. Too expensive? You're fined. Too burnt? Weirdly, still fined. Bakers who broke the rules could lose their license, get their bread confiscated, or even, yes, be put in the stocks. Picture it. A baker dangling by the town square, getting pelted with day-old baguettes while someone yells, "You call this a farthing loaf?" And while that sounds dramatic, it wasn't entirely unfair. Bread was the staple food. Most people ate it with every meal, and when grain prices rose, riots weren't far behind. Governments regulated bread not out of kindness, but fear. Hungry citizens tend to get stabby. Even monks had to follow these rules. Some monasteries, despite owning vast grain fields and fancy ovens, were regularly audited to ensure they weren't cheating the poor. Records show entire abbeys being called out for selling loaves of shameful puffiness. That's a real quote. Someone's medieval job was to go around measuring loaf puffiness. Meanwhile, in France, they took bread very seriously. Bakers in Paris were organized into guilds, which sounds nice until you realize that breaking their rules could result in a ban, or being dunked in the Seine. Literally. Medieval justice was wet, petty, and extremely specific. And bread wasn't just food. It was symbolism. At royal feasts, manchet bread, the whitest, finest flour loaves, was reserved for nobles. Peasants ate coarse black bread, made with barley, rye, or whatever mystery grains they could scrounge. Sometimes even tree bark. Not joking. Tree bark bread, because nothing says bon appetit like desperation and pine shavings. The difference between breads was so stark that a person's social status could be guessed just by the color of their loaf. White bread meant wealth. Brown bread meant poverty. And gray bread? That meant you might need to visit the local healer for some unfortunate gastrointestinal consequences. And don't even think about wasting bread. That was a sin. Stale bread became trenchers, flat. Dry slices used as edible plates. After a meal you didn't toss them. You gave them to the poor or animals, or used them to soak up sauces for tomorrow's breakfast. A medieval dishwasher was just a really determined goat. In some places, bread was so integral to survival that villages created bread tokens. Little wooden coins redeemable only for loaves. Imagine handing a carved acorn to a baker and getting a roll in return. It wasn't cute, it was survival. And yet, despite all this regulation, bakers still found ways to cheat. They hollowed out loaves. They added chalk or ground beans to stretch the flour. They used old, moldy dough scraps to bulk up new batches. In London, some corrupt bakers were caught running what can only be described as early bread-based Ponzi schemes. They were literally cooking the books. To avoid punishment, honest bakers came up with something clever. The baker's dozen. If you bought 12 loaves, they'd toss in a 13th just in case one was underweight and they got in trouble. Think of it as an edible insurance policy. So next time you get an extra donut, you're participating in a tradition of paranoia and flour-fueled generosity. And there were other bread superstitions, too. Some folks believed if you cut the end of the loaf first, someone in the family would die. Others swore that breaking bread unevenly caused arguments. And let's not forget the belief that sharing a loaf could seal a romantic bond, especially if it was soaked in honey and wine. That's right, medieval love bread. Historians still debate why these bread laws were enforced so harshly. Was it purely economic control? Religious influence? A way to distract the masses from bigger problems? Possibly all three. One scholar called it the yeast-based foundation of civil order. which might be the most British sentence ever written. As the market quiets down and the bread stalls begin to pack up, you linger behind, watching a young girl hold a loaf the size of her head. Her grin stretches wider than the crust. Maybe the bread's a little stale. Maybe it's a touch light. But it's warm. And it's hers. You tuck your hands into your sleeves, the chill of the afternoon settling in. Your feet crunch over bits of straw and crust as you head back through the square. A bell tolls in the distance. Somewhere, someone is already preparing tomorrow's dough, needing not just flour and water, but centuries of ritual, hunger, and hope. And just like that, the world turns, carried gently on the scent of fresh bread and old laws. If you think eating in the Middle Ages was just about finding something to fill your stomach, think again. 'Cause back then, even what you were allowed to eat or not eat could be a matter of the sacred. Food, you see, wasn't just physical sustenance. To the medieval mind, it was a question of morality, of salvation, of devotion, and sometimes a gentle torment every time the church bell rang to signal another meatless day had begun. In medieval society, where Christianity ruled every rhythm of life, religion wasn't just at the altar, it was in the kitchen, on the dining table, and bubbling away in every pot. There were over 150 days a year when meat was forbidden. Not one or two, but over a third of the year, people were not allowed to eat meat. Fridays? No meat. Lent? No meat. Advent? No meat. And countless other minor feast days also joined the farewell meat list. That meant chicken, beef, pork, the staples of today's diet, were systematically struck off the menu on those days. You might think, well, then they just ate fish. Yes, fish was the divine loophole approved by the church. But not everyone lived near a river or the sea. For folks in remote villages, that often meant eating salted, dried fish, sometimes so dry and tough it was like chewing leather. In isolated monasteries or poor rural areas, a meatless meal often meant thin porridge made from foraged greens and root vegetables. A bowl of pottage, a bland vegetable stew, became a faithful but dreary companion during fasting days. And what about the nobles? They were richer, of course, and far more creative in bending the rules. Take beaver, for example. It was once considered acceptable as fish, because it lived in water, despite being a furry, rodent-like mammal. So aristocratic chefs added beaver, otters, and even swan, a bird with special consideration, to their fasting menus as a way to keep the faith and the flavor. And the monks? They lived in monasteries, where meals were part of the spiritual rhythm. But don't assume they all lived in austerity. Some monasteries had special fish kitchens, where fresh fish, salted fish, seaweed, and seafood were seasoned with spices imported from the East. But not everyone enjoyed such privilege. Most people had to scrape together what they could. A few tiny fish from a shallow stream, or dried fish from the market that smelled questionable and could easily turn your stomach the next day. Fasting was meant to purify the soul. Yes, in theory. But in practice, it often made the poor hungrier, the rich sneakier, and housewives more stressed. Yet there's no denying it. Fasting days gave rise to a unique aspect of medieval food culture. People got creative, fasting bread made from mashed beans, linseed oil instead of animal fat, and wild mushroom soup spiced with herbs to mask its musty scent. In some regions, fasting pies made of beetroot and stale bread crusts became holiday specialties, though no one really craved them on normal days. Even children learned early that Friday means no meat, and dinner would be thin broth with a few greens. No one questioned it, it was simply part of life, like the sunrise or the church bells. A diet not chosen by you, but by faith, the church, and the liturgical calendar. Whether you were a peasant, a monk, or a noblewoman in a castle, no one entirely escaped the church's dietary rules. Today, we often look back at the Middle Ages with a mix of curiosity and pity, but it's worth acknowledging one thing. They lived, they believed, and they tried to live in accordance with that belief, even when it meant eating beetroot stew every week. Strange, isn't it? That in a world full of hunger, disease, and uncertainty, people still gave up precious meat, all for faith. This isn't just a story about food. It's a story about people, about commitment, about discipline, or at least the attempt. So now close your eyes and imagine. You're sitting by the fire in a cold monastery, holding a bowl of watery vegetable soup, listening to the church bell echoing through the fog. No meat today. But that's okay. You're still here. You still believe. And tomorrow is another day. Sleep well. Have you ever tried eating a bowl of porridge made with nothing but water and white radish? No salt, no pepper, no seasoning of any kind? If not, congratulations, you've never eaten like a medieval peasant. To modern people, spices are essential. A pinch of salt, a clove of garlic, a dash of black pepper, a sprinkle of herbs. These can transform a bland meal into something memorable. But imagine you're living in 12th century Europe, in a small village, far from the sea, far from the markets, far from flavor. Salt, a luxury. Black pepper, a gift from heaven. Cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, found only in royal feasts or in the pages of scripture. For the vast majority of people, especially those in the lower classes, the concept of seasoning barely existed. Meals were mostly boiled, stewed, or simmered, and they all shared one common taste. The taste of water. Spices weren't just rare, they were extremely expensive. A pound of black pepper could be worth as much as a cow. Cloves. Even more. These spices were brought from the distant east. India, China, faraway lands. Crossing deserts and seas, passing through dozens of middlemen before ever reaching Europe. They were treated like gold, sometimes more precious than gold. Not just for their taste but for the status they symbolized. In a noble kitchen, a pinch of cinnamon was a quiet declaration. I have wealth. I have power. I do not eat like common folk. For peasants, that meant dull, repetitive meals. Vegetable porridge, rock-hard bread, boiled turnips. And if they were lucky, some wild onions. No garlic. No chili. No fish sauce, no soy, no miracle sauce to save the day. Even salt, the most basic seasoning, could be a scarce commodity. Inland villages had to rely on salt brought in from far away, heavily taxed, and not always affordable. In some areas, people boiled salty marsh water for days just to collect a few shimmering grains, treating them like treasure. So what did they do for flavor? They improvised. Sometimes they got desperate. Some tried adding fireplace ashes or mineral-rich mud for a salty taste. Not exactly safe. Others foraged for wild herbs like thyme, rosemary, or parsley. But these weren't always available, and rarely strong enough to mask the bitterness of overcooked turnips or slightly spoiled oatmeal. In more fortunate monasteries, monks tended herb gardens, places where mint, mugwort, and savory plants were used in tea or added to soups. But still, those were small bursts of hope in an otherwise flavorless world. Nobles, meanwhile, lived in another universe entirely. Royal banquets were showcases of power, and spices were the centerpiece. They tossed black pepper on roasted meats, dusted pastries with cinnamon, and soaked wine with cloves. Records describe feasts during the reign of Edward II of England, where over 2 kilograms of nutmeg were used for a single dinner, more than the yearly income of a small village. To them, spices were more than taste. They were power. Politics. A statement that shouted, I am not one of you. And the common people, they chewed in silence, nibbled stale bread, sipped thin broth, and quietly imagined what food might taste like, if it had any. Children grew up without ever tasting spice. No heat, no sweetness, no warmth of ginger. For them, food was life, but not joy. Perhaps the saddest part wasn't the hunger. It was the monotony. One day porridge. Next day porridge. Next week, still porridge, cooked the same way with the same lack of aroma. Yet they survived. They worked the fields. They prayed. They raised children and hoped for better harvests. And maybe, just maybe, that's the quiet beauty of medieval cuisine. A beauty not in pleasure but in patience. In gratitude for every turnip, every loaf of bread, no matter how flavorless it may have been. And if you're thinking, how did they live like that? Perhaps you should ask yourself this. You might survive without taste. But could you live without faith? For them, food wasn't about indulgence. It was about survival, about discipline, and sometimes, about reminding oneself that the world might not always be flavorful, but you still have to live every day fully within it. If you think drinking water is a simple matter, just turn on a tap and drink. Remember that in the Middle Ages, drinking water was a completely different story. It could literally be a matter of life and death for an entire village or even a region. You see, clean water was a luxury back then. The nearby stream might carry not only water but also all the filth of the village, animal waste, garbage, even dead animals floating by. Water treatment systems as we know them today did not exist. And water filters? Forget it. Water was heavily contaminated, filled with countless bacteria and parasites that caused diseases. Drinking directly from a well, a stream, or a pond without any treatment was the leading cause of digestive diseases, cholera, dysentery, and a host of deadly infectious illnesses. So how did people avoid silent death from contaminated water? The answer might surprise you. They drank beer and wine. Yes, you heard that right. Beer and wine were not just recreational drinks. They were often the safest water sources available. Imagine remote European villages, where wells or streams teemed with harmful microbes. People dared not drink plain water. Instead, they consumed weak beer or diluted wine every day. Medieval beer was very different from what you see in modern bars. It was usually brewed light, with low alcohol content, cloudy, and slightly sweet from natural fermentation. But more importantly, the fermentation process produced enough alcohol to kill harmful bacteria, making these beverages far safer than plain water. Wine, especially diluted with water, played a similar role. Wine was considered a kind of pure water because its alcohol content, a natural disinfectant, killed germs. People often diluted wine to lower the alcohol concentration and make it easier to drink, while still maintaining its protective qualities. You might ask, what about children and the elderly? The answer: weak beer or diluted wine as well. This may sound strange or unbelievable to modern ears, but in the context of the Middle Ages, giving children a little beer was common because it was safer than contaminated water. Interestingly, thanks to this habit of drinking beer and diluted wine, medieval villagers could reduce outbreaks of waterborne diseases, which were once the leading causes of death. However, this doesn't mean life was always merry and easy. Beer and wine were not always readily available. During harsh winters or poor harvests, production was difficult. People had to conserve and share every precious drop. Moreover, beer and wine could never fully replace clean water. They still needed water for cooking, washing, and irrigation. But the lack of safe drinking water made daily life far more challenging. Contaminated water also had other consequences. For example, in crowded cities like London or Paris, primitive sewage systems dumped waste directly into rivers running through the city. People who drank from these rivers often suffered poisoning or cholera outbreaks. That's why monks, nobles, and wealthy merchants did everything possible to secure clean water, sometimes building private wells or reservoirs within castles and monasteries. Meanwhile, the poor could only pray, hoping a plague would not strike. An interesting story from the Middle Ages involves monasteries building simple water filtration systems using sand, gravel, and charcoal to purify water for daily use. These rudimentary systems saved countless lives and helped monks maintain a healthy, spiritual life to serve their communities. People also discovered that boiling water or soaking it for a long time in clay jars helped reduce harmful bacteria. But these methods were not widespread, usually limited to monasteries, castles, or large cities. Most ordinary people still relied on weak beer or diluted wine as a lifesaver in a sea of polluted water. Can you imagine that? Today we simply turn on the tap and get pure, clean water to drink. But just a few hundred years ago, taking a sip of untreated water could mean a death sentence. Medieval people transformed beer and wine into indispensable sources of life, not just drinks for leisure or celebration. For centuries, this habit helped them survive plagues, famine, and some of the darkest days in human history. So next time you hold a cold beer or a fragrant glass of wine, remember that behind these drinks lies a long history of survival, creativity, and human resilience. Their drinks might not have been perfect or delicious as we imagine today, but they helped people through darkness and towards the light of a new day. Now, you can close your eyes, take a deep breath, and imagine sitting by the hearth in a medieval village, holding a warm cup of weak beer, listening to the rain outside, and feeling the powerful spirit of those who survived thanks to that simple yet miraculous drink. You open your eyes to the dim light of a cold morning. It's not an alarm clock, nor a phone ringing, just the sound of a rooster crowing in the backyard and the shuffle of footsteps across the damp earth as others rise before you. You yawn, stretch, and wrap yourself in a thick, coarse woolen tunic, ready to begin another day. Just like any other day in the life of someone living in the Middle Ages, you step into the kitchen, if it can even be called that. There are no white-tiled walls, no electric stoves, and certainly no refrigerators or dishwashers. Just a small, dark, smoke-filled corner where the faint flicker of flame from a stone hearth is the only source of heat for cooking. You crouch to light the fire. The wood from last night is damp with dew. You blow, poke, and coax the flames patiently until your lips go numb from the cold, because fire, that simple thing, is always the first battle of the day. There's no gas, no knobs to turn. Everything depends on the wind, the wood, and the fire-keeping skills you learned from your mother, your grandmother, from the scoldings you received after burning the porridge or letting the fire die out. Your cooking pot is a large iron cauldron, hanging from a rusted chain above the fire. Want to change the temperature? There's no dial. You have to lift the chain, add more wood, or rake out the coals. Every action takes experience and a bit of instinct. Sometimes you get burned. Often your eyes sting from the smoke, but there's no other choice. You check the pantry. If you're lucky, there's some stale bread from the day before, maybe a turnip or an onion to boil into soup. Without a fridge, everything must be eaten quickly or risk going sour or moldy. Meat? Rare. Reserved for holidays or when someone just slaughtered a pig. Most days your meal is a piece of hard, black bread and a watery vegetable broth thin enough to see your reflection in the bottom of the bowl. You pound wheat with a stone pestle, sifting the grain through a wooden sieve to remove the husks. Making flour isn't easy. The hand mill groans with every turn, and each turn sends pain shooting up your shoulder. But if you don't grind it, there's no flour for bread, the family's staple food. Baking bread isn't much better. You have to heat a clay oven made from brick for an hour before placing the dough inside. There's no thermometer. You judge the heat by feel, by the color of the ashes, the glow of the coals. Misjudge it, and the bread is either raw or burnt to a crisp. You remember the last time your house caught fire, just because someone forgot a pot on the hearth. There's no tap to put out the flames. People had to run for water from the well, or from wooden barrels outside. The kitchen isn't just a place for food. It's a constant fire hazard. A single spark could destroy your entire timber-framed cottage. You head to the chicken coop, hoping for an egg today. If you find one, it's a luxury. But even an egg needs to be well cooked. You know too well the taste of half-rotten eggs and how the stench of undercooked yolk lingers in a small, smoky room. You carry buckets of water from the well, heavy and sloshing, and pour them into a wooden barrel for daily use. There's no running water. Every drop costs you sweat. And it must be boiled before use. River and well water can make your entire family sick. Diarrhea, fever, and sometimes worse, death. Spices? Forget it. No iodized salt or refined cooking oils. You cook with animal fat, usually lard. As for spices, they're luxury items, appearing only on rare market days when traders from afar happen to pass through. Pepper, cinnamon, star anise, those are dreams. Sometimes you cook for a large household. Grandparents, parents, children, even farmhands. A single pot of soup must feed 10, and no one eats to fullness. Just one small bowl each with a piece of bread to pad the stomach. No porcelain bowls, just wooden ones and spoons, easy to make, hard to break, and always faintly smelling of old food despite your best efforts with ash and cold water. The children cry of hunger. Your heart tightens. Not because you don't want to give them more, but because there's nothing left. Food is scarce, crops have failed, and sometimes you boil turnip peels or old leaves into broth. Once, you even made gruel from tree bark, bitter and hard to swallow, but better than starving. There's no diverse menu, no real cuisine. Cooking is survival. Turning the barest ingredients into something edible is a form of art. You dream of a stove made of iron, with a dial to control the heat. A place free of smoke, where you don't have to blow the fire each morning. You dream of a pantry filled with meat, vegetables, soft bread. But it's only a dream. You return to the pot of soup, bubbling faintly. The sharp smell of boiled turnip stings your nose. Not appetizing, but it's all you have. You ladle out bowls one by one. They thank you not because it tastes good but because, at least today, there is something to eat. You sit back in the kitchen corner, still clutching the chipped wooden ladle. You sigh. A new day has begun, and tomorrow, you already know, will be just like today. In your world where hardship and scarcity rule, cooking is not a creative act. It's pure survival. And you are the keeper of the fire. The one who sustains life with your cracked hands and the flickering flame of a smoky medieval hearth. You wake up to the sudden chill of an October morning, the thatched roof dripping from last night's rain. The wind howls through the cracks in your wooden walls, and the hearth long gone cold. Outside, the sky hangs low with gray clouds, pressing down on the field stripped bare after yet another failed harvest. You pull your woolen tunic tighter, the one you spun last winter, and step outside, not for fresh air, but to see if there's anything left to eat. Back when you were younger, you'd hear the elders say that good weather meant full barns, fat sheep, and children with full bellies. But that kind of fortune never found you. You've lived through too many seasons where rain didn't stop, or heat scorched the earth. And this year, it seems, the weather has turned its back on your whole village. It rained all summer. The barley drowned. The roots of the cabbages rotted. The beans molded before they could ripen. When the rain finally stopped, the earth was too soggy to till. Then came an early frost that killed whatever was left standing. No time for second chances. You still remember the first time you saw your mother cry. It wasn't death that brought the tears. It was an empty chest. The chest where you usually kept seed grain for spring. She sat there silently, turning the empty sacks over and over in her hands. Nothing to plant. Nothing to hope for. And that's when hunger came. Not the kind that makes your stomach growl for a missed meal, but the kind that settles deep into your bones. First, meals became smaller. A loaf of bread sliced thinner. The stew stretched with water. Then the children started fainting in the fields. The adults, your neighbors, stopped leaving their homes. Not from laziness, but because they had no energy left to work. You walked to the small storage shed, where in better years turnips and grain would be stacked high. Now, only a few withered potatoes sit in a basket. A string of onions hangs from the ceiling, along with a small wheel of cheese spotted with mold. You count it all again. If you ration it just right, maybe you have enough for 3 more days. And then who knows? You're not alone. No one in the village has enough. And you've seen worse. That winter, years ago, when the river froze solid and snow buried the earth for 3 straight months, people ate bark. They boiled roots that made them sick. They stripped leaves off bushes, and some ate their horses after they froze to death in the roads. Some didn't survive to see spring. Most people think of famine as sudden and violent. But you know better. Hunger creeps. It takes your strength little by little. It blurs your thoughts, makes your fingers numb, your judgment shaky. You find yourself arguing with family over a single piece of bread. You start hiding food. You stop trusting others. Even your neighbors, once your friends, seem like rivals now. You remember one year, when winter came too early. Snow covered the fields in October. The ground turned to stone. You watched the last ox in the village get slaughtered, each family given a share. You brought home a small lump of fat, fried it in the pan, and the smell nearly made you cry. But you didn't eat it. Not then. Your child was coughing in bed, too weak to cry from hunger. So you saved it. There are nights you sit in the dark, stirring the ashes in the hearth just to keep a bit of warmth alive. Not to cook, you have nothing left to cook, but to keep your hands from freezing. You think of those rare days when the sun came out and your fields were green, and you breathed easy again for a while. Those days feel like they belong to a storybook now, but still you get up. You keep going, because tomorrow might bring a change. Maybe the wind will shift. Maybe the next planting will take. You gather twigs, dry grass, anything to burn for warmth. A pot of hot water on a freezing morning isn't a meal, but it quiets your stomach and comforts your child. You, the firekeeper, are still the heart of this household. Even as you feel powerless against the sky, you've lived through many winters. You've seen hunger before, but you've never grown used to that helpless feeling as you look up at the gray, unyielding clouds and ask yourself, will we survive this one? And though no one speaks it aloud, you know everyone in the village carries the same silent prayer. Just one good season. One season with mild winds, steady rain, warm sun, soft earth, and growing grain. Just once more. Just one more season of enough. You ever think about what it meant to eat healthy before folks even knew what healthy meant? Back in the Middle Ages, there was no talk of protein, vitamins, carbs, or good fats. Nobody was tracking calories or balancing food groups. There were no food pyramids on classroom walls, no morning shows telling you which superfoods to try. No one was checking their iron levels or thinking about fiber. You ate what you had, and what you had depended on the weather, your land, your class, and a little bit of luck. Imagine yourself waking up in a drafty stone cottage, maybe sometime in the 13th century. You rub your eyes, stretch your limbs, and reach for a crust of yesterday's bread. It's hard. Real hard. But you dip it in a bowl of weak ale or thin onion soup and chew anyway. That's breakfast. Maybe lunch, too. Most peasants didn't know that this kind of diet, bread and broth day after day, lacked the nutrients to keep a body running smoothly. But it was filling, and filling your belly was the goal. They didn't understand that scurvy came from a lack of vitamin C, or that fatigue could be caused by anemia. They just knew that sometimes people got sick. Sometimes their teeth fell out. Sometimes their legs ached or their children stopped growing. And they prayed. Because in their minds, illness came from sin or bad air or evil spirits, not from what was on the dinner table. The diet of the average medieval peasant was heavy on grains, barley, rye, oats, and light on pretty much everything else. Vegetables were eaten when available, but there wasn't much variety. Turnips, onions, leeks, cabbages, those were staples. Fruit, if it grew nearby and wasn't claimed by someone higher on the food chain, sure. But oranges, bananas, anything exotic or full of citrus, completely unheard of. Meat was a rare treat. Maybe a few times a year, you'd get a bit of salted pork or a tough stew with bone-in chicken if you were lucky. Eggs were precious, saved for trading or the ill. Dairy was common in some places, especially among those with access to cows or goats, but again, it wasn't part of any balanced diet plan. It was just what was there. Now, higher up the ladder, things got a little different, but not necessarily better. The wealthy ate more meat, more pastries, more heavily spiced foods. They had access to sugar, imported wine, and exotic spices from the East. But with all that came a whole new set of problems. Gout, for example, was called the rich man's disease. They didn't understand purines or uric acid buildup. They just knew their toes swelled up and hurt like the devil. Still, they feasted and they suffered. You look at a medieval monk, someone who spent their life in quiet reflection, tending gardens and copying manuscripts, and you might think they fared better. And in a way they did. Monks were among the few who studied herbs and fasting with some sense of purpose. They grew their own food, ate simple meals, and avoided gluttony. But even then, their diets were often unbalanced. Fish 3 times a day on fast days, bread and porridge the rest of the time. They avoided meat for spiritual reasons, not health ones. They didn't know about protein deficiencies. They didn't know why so many of them grew pale and weak in old age. They just accepted it. Pregnant women, children, the elderly, none of them had special diets. If you were a pregnant peasant woman, you still hauled water, cooked meals, and ate the same porridge as everyone else. You didn't get prenatal vitamins or folic acid. Children often weaned too early or too late, and their growing bodies lacked calcium, iron, and other essentials. Bones grew crooked, teeth rotted early, and no one made the connection between what they ate, or didn't, and how their bodies suffered. Malnutrition wasn't always about starvation. Sometimes it was about monotony. Eating the same thing every day without variety leads to what we now call hidden hunger. When the stomach is full, but the body is starving for nutrients. That kind of long-term deficiency weakens the immune system, stunts growth, and sets the stage for illness after illness. And here's the thing, people lived with this for centuries. They accepted tooth loss, rickets, stunted growth, and sudden death as part of life. Nobody was testing food for nutritional value. There were no labels to read, no doctors giving diet plans, no campaigns teaching you about iron-rich greens or heart-healthy grains. Food safety was another issue entirely. With no refrigeration, no pasteurization, and no knowledge of bacteria, people often ate spoiled or contaminated food. Meat might be days old, bread could grow mold, and water often came from dirty rivers shared with livestock. But again, they didn't understand microbes or toxins. They just got sick and hoped they'd get better. It's easy to look back and wonder how people survived at all. And the truth is many didn't. Life expectancy was low. Infant mortality was high. If a person made it past childhood and into their 40s, they were considered blessed. And yet somehow they carried on. Generation after generation. They planted what they could, hunted when able, foraged when necessary. They followed the church calendar with its feast days and fast days, not out of health concerns, but spiritual discipline. And through it all, food was central. Not just for survival, but for tradition, for family, for community. When you think about it, we've come a long way. We have the science, the data, the knowledge they never did. We know what our bodies need, how to prevent deficiencies, how to live longer, healthier lives. But maybe there's still something to learn from those who came before us. They valued food. They respected the seasons. They ate with gratitude, even if the meal was humble. So next time you sit down to a balanced plate, colorful vegetables, lean proteins, whole grains, remember the long road we traveled to get here. And maybe say a quiet thank you to those who endured their hunger, so that we might better understand ours. You find yourself transported back to the Middle Ages, a time when the world was vastly different from the one you know. The streets are narrow and winding, lined with timber-framed houses that lean precariously over the cobblestone paths. The air is thick with the mingling scents of smoke, animals, and unwashed bodies. Sanitation is rudimentary at best. And the concept of germ theory is centuries away from discovery. In this era, food preservation is a constant challenge. Without refrigeration, people rely on methods like salting, smoking, and drying to keep their food from spoiling. Salted meats are common, but the salt is coarse and impure, often failing to prevent the growth of harmful bacteria. Smoking adds flavor and some preservation, but it's not foolproof. Drying removes moisture, yet in damp climates, mold and rot are persistent threats. Food poisoning news. You observe a bustling marketplace where vendors display their goods openly. Fish lie on wooden slabs exposed to the sun and flies. Meat hangs from hooks, slowly turning in the breeze, with no protection from the elements or insects. Bread, a staple food, is baked in communal ovens, but the flour is often contaminated with ergot, a fungus that causes hallucinations and convulsions. Milk is consumed raw, unpasteurized, and frequently spoiled. Water sources are equally perilous. Wells are shallow and easily contaminated by nearby latrines or animal waste. Rivers serve as both water supply and sewage disposal, leading to outbreaks of diseases like dysentery and cholera. Boiling water is not a common practice, and the link between contaminated water and illness is not understood. Personal hygiene is limited. Bathing is infrequent, partly due to the belief that water can carry disease through the skin. People wash their hands before meals, but soap is a luxury, and cleanliness is more about social etiquette than health. Clothing is rarely washed, and lice and fleas are ubiquitous, spreading typhus and other ailments. Reddit, +16. BBC, +16. Cleaning and maintenance management, +16. In this environment, foodborne illnesses are rampant. You witness individuals suffering from severe stomach pains, vomiting, and diarrhea after consuming contaminated food. Without knowledge of bacteria or viruses, these symptoms are attributed to imbalances of bodily humors or divine punishment. Medical treatments are rudimentary, involving bloodletting or herbal remedies, often doing more harm than good. You encounter a family mourning the loss of a child who succumbed to food poisoning. The community offers prayers and holds a modest funeral, but there's no investigation into the cause of death. Such tragedies are common, and people accept them as part of life. The lack of understanding about disease transmission means that preventive measures are virtually non-existent. As you continue your journey, you see attempts at improving public health. Some towns have ordinances requiring butchers to dispose of offal outside city limits. Markets are occasionally inspected, and spoiled goods are discarded. However, enforcement is inconsistent, and corruption is widespread. The wealthy can afford better food and cleaner living conditions, but the poor are left vulnerable. You reflect on the stark contrast between this world and your own. Modern advancements in food safety, sanitation, and medical knowledge have drastically reduced the prevalence of foodborne illnesses. Refrigeration, pasteurization, and stringent hygiene standards ensure that the food you consume is safe. Water treatment facilities provide clean drinking water, And public health campaigns educate people about disease prevention. The journey through medieval times serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of these advancements. It underscores the value of continued vigilance in maintaining food safety and public health. While the past cannot be changed, understanding it helps you appreciate the progress made and the need to uphold these standards for future generations. You step through a great stone gate and find yourself transported centuries into the past. This is the medieval world, a place where your status doesn't just determine how people look at you. It also defines what lands on your plate. You smell it before you see it, the rich aroma of roasting meat drifting from the castle kitchens, mingling with the sour steam of boiled vegetables, and with smoke rising from the cottages on the edge of the village. Imagine yourself as a noble lord or lady. You live in a stone fortress, protected by thick walls and guarded gates. Inside, your dining hall is grand. Long wooden tables draped with embroidered cloth, polished goblets filled with spiced wine or mead, and servants at the ready. The food served here isn't just nourishment, it's theater. Roasted pork glazed with honey and mustard, whole geese laid out with golden skin crackling, soft cheeses brought in from distant provinces, and spices. Oh, the spices! Cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves. These come from lands so far away you've only heard of them in travelers' tales. Each dish is a proclamation of power. You don't eat because you're hungry. You eat because it tells the world who you are. A meat pie shaped like a peacock, its tail feathers fanned out in bright, unnatural dyes. A whole salmon presented with glittering scales still intact. Even desserts are displays of opulence. Candied fruits, marzipan sculptures, and mountains of pastries laced with sugar. A rare luxury, known as white gold, affordable only to the richest. Servants stand silently, watching your every gesture. They slice, pour, and bow, retreating the moment your eyes flicker with displeasure. In this world, food isn't just fuel. It's a language of status. Every banquet is a performance. Every bite is a reminder that you belong to a world most others can only dream of. Then you leave the castle. You follow a rutted dirt path down toward the village, where shadows stretch long across the straw-thatched roofs. The air is different here. Damp with smoke, the scent of onions and wild herbs wafting from open hearths. You enter a peasant's hut, humble and cramped, where a family is gathering after a long day in the fields. They are tired. The mother stirs a pot suspended over the fire, its contents simple and sparse. Barley porridge, a few cabbage leaves, some onions, maybe a turnip. There is no meat today. Perhaps not for weeks. There are no spices, no sugar. Just what the land yields and what they can grow or barter for. A round of black bread, rough and dry, is passed around. Sometimes it carries the faint taste of mold, but it is eaten without complaint. Meat is a holiday dream, reserved for special feasts if they are lucky. When the church bells ring on feast days, maybe a chicken will be slaughtered, or a bit of sausage shared between many. But most days meals are plain, repetitive, and lacking the nutrition the body truly craves. And yet, you notice something quiet and powerful. The way they sit together, shoulder to shoulder around the fire. The way the children tear at bread with quiet discipline, never asking for more than their share. There's gratitude in their eyes even for so little. Their food is not a choice. It's the result of hard labor, sweat, and prayer. They don't dine for pleasure. They eat to survive. Every now and then you hear whispered tales. A woman who once worked in the manor kitchen speaks of a cheese pie she once glimpsed. A child remembers his father bringing home a single cured sausage left over from the Lord's feast. These stories sparkle in their memories like folklore, tiny windows into a world that feels impossibly far away. You stand now between two realities, one of silk-draped feasts and jellied eels, the other of watery gruel and foraged greens. You realize that in this time, food is not simply a matter of taste or health. It's a mirror of your birth, your place in the order of things. Hunger or fullness is not just a matter of harvest. It's a matter of hierarchy. And then, like mist lifting at dawn, you return to the present day. You are back in a world where strawberries from Korea and avocados from Mexico sit side by side in the supermarket cooler. You pass aisles filled with choices, more than most medieval kings could imagine. You remember what it meant to eat only what you could grow, to never taste sugar, to hope for meat once a season. Suddenly, your ordinary lunch, a salad, a sandwich, maybe just a yogurt, feels like a treasure. The fact that you can choose it, afford it, enjoy it without ceremony or fear, is a kind of luxury millions before you never knew. You now see your kitchen differently. That loaf of bread, soft and fresh, is no longer just bread. It's freedom. It's dignity. It's peace. And that's the quiet legacy of food in the medieval world. Not just what they ate, but what it revealed. Status wasn't just worn on sleeves. It was baked into loaves and boiled into broths. To eat richly was to be powerful. To eat poorly was to be forgotten. And to eat, simply, was to live with grace in a world that offered little of it. You wake up in a small timber-framed room. The smell hitting you before your eyes adjust to the gray morning light. It's not rot exactly, not yet. But it's close. A blend of sour milk, damp straw, smoke, and the faint metallic tang of old blood. This is a kitchen. And this, you realize, is breakfast medieval style. You look around. There's no refrigerator humming quietly in the corner. No neatly labeled Tupperware stacked on shelves. No plastic wrap, no expiration dates, and definitely no health inspections. Just a wooden table. A fireplace where smoke curls up and hangs heavy in the air. And a few clay pots that have been reused so many times, they've absorbed the scent of every stew ever simmered inside them. You are no noble today. You are someone from the village, perhaps the baker's apprentice, or the wife of a thatcher. You eat what you can when you can, and you hope it doesn't make you sick. The bread on the table is dark and dense. It's been sitting out since yesterday, maybe longer. The crust is rock hard, the center dry. You scrape off a bit of mold growing on the edge, green-blue fuzz like lichen on old stone. Mold isn't ideal, but it's better than starving. If it smells fine, it must be fine, right? That's how people live here. There's no real understanding of bacteria. No germ theory. No microscopic invaders creeping invisibly into your food. What matters is the smell. If it doesn't smell foul, or cause your stomach to turn, it's fair game. You glance over at the meat. A small piece, boiled yesterday, and left on the counter overnight. Flies have had their fill. And the surface is slick with something you don't quite want to name. It might be safe. It might not. But you're hungry, and hunger doesn't wait for good conditions. You might boil it again. That's a common trick. People say it refreshes the meat, though what it really does is disguise the decay. A few herbs tossed in the pot, rosemary if you're lucky, more likely garlic and onions, and suddenly the sourness is harder to smell. Still there. But now you can convince yourself it's edible. You drink ale with your meal, even in the morning. Not because you want to start the day drunk, but because water isn't safe. Wells are contaminated with human waste, dead animals, and all manner of invisible threats. So ale, weak and warm, is your lifeline. It's safer than water, and the fermentation, however crude, kills off at least some of the things that might otherwise kill you. Your stomach, you've learned, is a battleground. Every bite is a gamble. Cheese that's turned sharp with age and perhaps more than a little spoilage. Milk stored in the cellar that may or may not curdle by nightfall. Fish that smells of the sea but also of something else, something less clean. Salt is precious, and if you have it, you use it generously. It's the closest thing you have to preservation. You pack meat in it, rubbing it deep into the flesh and storing it in barrels, hoping it lasts until winter ends. But salt is expensive, and for most people there's never enough. Sometimes, you smoke the meat. Hang it high above the fire and let the smoke cure it slowly. But even this has its limits. The moment it's sliced, the clock starts ticking. No icebox, no cold cellar. No vacuum sealing. Just the hope that you can eat it all before it turns. And when it turns, well, you eat around the worst bits. You hear stories in the village. A boy who died after eating spoiled rabbit. A family laid low by a tainted pot of eel stew. A mother who miscarried after consuming something, off during Lent. But no one connects these tragedies to microorganisms. They say it's bad luck or a punishment from God, or the result of a wandering curse. The link between food and disease is hazy, whispered, not proven. You wonder how anyone survives. But then you realize you've been conditioned. Your stomach is stronger than you thought. You've built up resistance through years of exposure. What would hospitalize a traveler might only give you a stomachache. Still, there's no guarantee. It's worst in summer. The heat makes everything turn faster. Milk spoils within hours. Meat sweats on the table. Fruit attracts swarms of gnats. And vegetables wilt unless eaten immediately. You've learned to eat fast and store little. Waste not, want not, but more often. Waste and want go hand in hand. Even the nobles you hear struggle. Their kitchens are larger. Their stores more abundant. But that doesn't mean their food is fresher. Grand feasts sometimes include meat that's been disguised with spices to hide the smell. Sauces made with vinegar and honey mask the funk of decay. You suspect their stomachs churn just like yours, only behind richer curtains. And there are times, dark times, when the hunger is too deep. When the rains don't come or the crops fail. Then people eat whatever they can find. Rats, dogs bark, leather soaked and boiled into broth. Food becomes something you fight for, steal for. And when you get it, you eat it fast. Without asking questions. You return to the present with a jolt. The smell of your own clean kitchen greets you like a silent miracle. You open your fridge and stare at rows of clean jars, labeled leftovers, fresh produce. You check a date on a yogurt cup and laugh. This is luxury. Safety, wrapped in plastic and sealed with certainty. You pour yourself a glass of water, clear, cold, safe, and marvel at what you used to take for granted. In the medieval world, food safety was a hope, not a guarantee. Every meal was a risk. Today, you live in an age where rotten food is the exception, not the norm. But if you ever forget the value of what you have, just remember that village kitchen. The moldy bread. The fly-covered stew. The gamble that was breakfast. And be thankful that you never have to wonder if your cheese might kill you. You don't know what a germ is. You've never heard of E. coli, salmonella, or listeria. Pasteur is still hundreds of years from being born, and microscopes are more dream than tool. In this world, the only things that make you sick are bad humors, evil spirits, or maybe just divine punishment for sins you can't remember committing. And so, you cook the way everyone else does, by feel, by smell, by guesswork. You are a cook in a medieval town, perhaps the village baker's assistant or a kitchen hand in a manor house. You know how to roast a goose and how to stew beans for a dozen mouths, but when it comes to safety, your only real gauge is your nose. The meat smells strange. A bit sour. It's been hanging for 2 days in the back room. You poke it. It's soft, maybe too soft. But it's the last piece left before market day. You rub some vinegar on it. Maybe that helps? Maybe not. But it masks the smell just enough. You'll stew it with onions, garlic, and enough herbs to drown out a battlefield stench. You learned that from your mother, who learned it from hers. If it smells bad, boil it longer. If it looks bad, chop it smaller. If it's green and fuzzy, scrape it off. Mold is just a part of life. There is no word for cross-contamination. No one separates the raw from the cooked. You cut vegetables and raw chicken on the same block, wipe the knife on your apron and keep going. Washing hands, you rinse them in a bowl of cold, greasy water that's been used 10 times already. You might wash up before church, but not before cutting meat. Soap exists, kind of, but it's rough and smelly and only used when absolutely necessary. The grime under your fingernails has lived there longer than some of your neighbors. There are no thermometers. You don't know what 165 degrees Fahrenheit is. You don't even know what Fahrenheit is. You hold your hand over the pot. If it's steaming and sizzling, that's hot enough. Maybe. Sometimes you spit into the stew. Not on purpose, but you're tasting, blowing, muttering curses. And something slips. No one notices. It will cook off, you think. Heat kills everything, doesn't it? When the food is done, you serve it on wooden platters that haven't been scrubbed in weeks. The dogs licked them last night. That's enough. You pile on the food, steaming and fragrant, and everyone eats with their hands. Fingers reach into the same bowl. No one thinks twice. And when someone gets sick, when they vomit through the night or groan with stomach cramps the next day, you never think it was the stew. Maybe they were cursed. Maybe they had too much wine. Maybe the moon is in a bad place. You certainly don't think it was the way you stored the fish in a wooden box beside the latrine, or the way you used yesterday's spoiled milk to make today's cheese. You simply shrug, say a prayer, and keep cooking. The wealthy? They have bigger kitchens, more servants, more spices. But not more knowledge. They too store meat in cellars where rats scurry freely. They cover the stink with cloves and saffron. serve roasted peacock that's been cooked on the outside but raw near the bone. And their guests clap and cheer until the fever sets in. And yet, you survive. Somehow, your gut has become a warrior, armored by years of battles against invisible enemies. You've eaten things that would send modern stomachs running. You've chewed on dried meat coated in a fine white fuzz and called it aged. You've swallowed gravy that separated into strange layers of oil and sludge. You've lived to tell the tale. There are no health inspections.
No labels. No refrigeración.
The idea that food can cause illness is foreign. Food heals. It gives strength. It connects people. Illness is a spiritual problem, not a kitchen one. You don't wear gloves. You don't use cutting boards with color codes. You certainly don't sanitize surfaces. You cook from instinct, from tradition, from desperation. And in a strange way, there's something admirable about that. You make do with what you have. You survive not because of science but in spite of its absence. You adapt. You learn that certain leaves help with upset stomachs, even if you don't know why. You know that bitter almonds sometimes kill, but only sometimes. Trial and error, repeated across generations. But it also means funerals are common. Children die from spoiled milk. Pregnant women from bad fish. Whole families from contaminated bread. And no one connects the dots. Until one day, hundreds of years from now, a man peers through a microscope and sees something that changes everything. A tiny wriggling shape on a glass slide. And with that, the world shifts. But for now, you stir your pot, scrape mold from the cheese, and pray the stew sits well. You've lived through enough bad meals to know how to hide a mistake. You've fed your family through famine and plague. You've cooked for joy and for sorrow. And though you don't know the word bacteria, you know that some days the stew kills. And some days it saves. You don't understand why, but you keep stirring anyway. You've been living in a small village during the Middle Ages, where every day feels like a struggle to stay alive. Food for you and your family is more than just a pleasure. It's survival. But the diet you rely on isn't exactly nourishing. It's repetitive, meager, and often lacking the vitamins and minerals your body desperately needs. This is a world where the phrase, "you are what you eat," isn't just a saying. It's a reality that shadows every breath you take. You wake up each morning with a dull ache somewhere in your body. Maybe your joints feel stiff, your skin looks pale, or your energy is low before the day even begins. This isn't surprising. The food you consume day in and day out is heavy on bread, coarse grains, and whatever vegetables the soil grudgingly produces. Meat. Rarely. When you do get a piece, it might be old or dried. Far from the fresh cuts that your wealthy neighbors enjoy. You long for something different, something vibrant, but your reality is far more grim. Because your diet lacks variety and essential nutrients, your body weakens over time. Deficiencies creep in silently. Vitamin C is scarce, making scurvy a lurking threat. Iron is hard to come by. And anemia creeps in, leaving you breathless after even simple chores. Protein is limited, slowing down healing, and leaving you vulnerable to infections. Your immune system is fragile. So when disease strikes, and it often does, your body has little strength to fight back. The chilling truth is that many people in your village rarely reach old age. Life expectancy hovers around 30 to 40 years, but that number hides the grim reality. Countless children never even make it past infancy, and adults are worn down by relentless hardship. It's as if your very diet conspires against you, making you more susceptible to the illnesses that sweep through your village like dark, unforgiving shadows. You hear stories of plagues and fevers that wipe out whole families, and you wonder how much of that is because of the weak foundation your body has been built on. You might feel haunted by the sense that no matter how hard you work or how careful you try to be, the food you eat is a slow poison, sapping your strength day by day. You're aware, even if only subconsciously, that your meals don't just fill your belly, they shape the fragile line between life and death. Your neighbors with a bit more money, the lords and ladies, seem to have it better. Their tables groan under the weight of roasted meats, cheeses, exotic spices, and fresh fruits. But even their abundance comes with a price. Their rich diet often leads to other illnesses. Too much fatty meat, too much wine, and the blood turns thick and slow, creating its own kind of vulnerability. Yet, compared to you, they at least enjoy some luxuries that might extend their years if not their health. You sometimes watch the local healer, an old woman with a deep knowledge of herbs and folk remedies, work her magic. She tries to patch up wounds, soothe fevers, and strengthen bodies with what little she has. But even her wisdom can only do so much against the invisible enemy of malnutrition that gnaws at your bones from within. The knowledge of vitamins, minerals, balanced diets, all that is centuries away from your world. When winter comes, the harshest season of all, food becomes even scarcer. You find yourself eating more gruel, a bland, watery porridge barely able to keep starvation at bay. Your teeth ache from the cold. Your hands tremble from hunger, and the shadows in the corners of your small home seem to whisper warnings. You know deep down that this winter could be your last. The cold doesn't just freeze the land. It freezes your chances of survival. The creeping fatigue in your body feels almost like a weight from another world. Something dark and ancient pressing down on your chest. You're not just fighting hunger. You're battling a silent erosion of your very life force. Some nights you lie awake, listening to the wind howl outside, and you wonder if you'll see spring again. But amid all this struggle, you cling to hope. You learn to appreciate the small moments, the warmth of a shared meal, even if meager, the taste of a wild berry found in the forest, the comfort of broth made from herbs. You tell yourself that each bite, no matter how humble, is a fight against the darkness that seeks to claim you. Your story is not unique. It's one shared by countless souls in villages across the land, trapped in the cycle of poor nutrition and frail health. You're part of a tapestry woven with hardship and endurance, where the human spirit shines faint but unyielding against the shadow of early death. And though you don't know it, the future holds discoveries that will one day change the fate of people like you. Knowledge about nutrients, hygiene, and medicine that will stretch lifespans and improve health. But for now, in your time, your diet is both a lifeline and a burden. A slow, steady tide that shapes your existence with its quiet, relentless force. So you keep eating what you can, living day by day, carrying the weight of history and hunger in your bones. You are a witness to the toll that poor diet takes on the human body. And your story is a reminder of the fragile line between survival and surrender, in a world long past but never forgotten. And so, as the days stretch softly into nights, you begin to feel a quiet calm settling over your weary body. The harsh edges of hunger and struggle blur gently, like the fading colors of a distant sunset. In the stillness, there is a tenderness that whispers through the air, a promise that no matter how heavy the burden, there is a moment of peace waiting for you. You breathe slowly now, letting the rhythm of your heartbeat lull you deeper into rest. Outside, the wind hums a gentle lullaby, weaving through the trees and carrying away the shadows that once seemed so close. The cold that once bit sharply now softens into a cool embrace, wrapping you in a calm that eases every ache. Your thoughts grow lighter, drifting on a quiet breeze toward dreams where the table overflows with warmth and light, where fresh bread and sweet fruits are more than just wishes. It is a place where strength returns to your limbs, and the weight on your chest lifts, replaced by the gentle pulse of hope. In this tender moment, you are cradled by the past and the promise of what is yet to come. The story of your days in this ancient world folds softly around you like a worn but comforting blanket, whispering that tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after, may hold something brighter. Now let your eyelids grow heavy, your breath fall slow and even, as you drift deeper and deeper into the quiet dark, wrapped in the gentle hush of the night. End of script. Sweet dreams.